All right, I think we are at a good number to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining our Spring Clean Your Online Life webinar. Just as a warning, this is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube by tomorrow morning. Please feel free to leave any questions in the Q&A, and we will try to get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. So today we are joined by Lance Spitzner, Director of Research at the SANS Institute, John Deats, who is the VP of Identity Access Management at AT&T, and Lisa Plaggemier, our Executive Director here at the National Cybersecurity Alliance. And I will kick it over to Lisa to get started.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to let our two guests tell us a little bit about themselves. Lance, give us a little background on who you are and what you
Ah,
do.
Just real quick, folks, my name's Lance Spitzner. I'm a director at the SANS Institute. I've been in cybersecurity for about 25, 30 years now. The first half of that career was very technical, but the last half of my career, I'm really focusing on the human side. It's something I'm passionate about, but to be honest, I also think that's where we can really make the biggest difference. So, Lisa, excited to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. John, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Hey, folks, I'm John Dietz. I currently work for AT&T as their head of identity and access for both the workforce and the consumer side. I've got about 20 years experience in cyber, primarily in different financial industry companies. I joined AT&T about a year ago, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk about what we can do to spring clean ourselves and our cyber environments this year. So, Lisa, thank
Yeah,
you for having me.
thanks for being with us. So, John and I are both from Texas, so spring's almost over here, I think. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to my garage yet. I got spring cleaning on the brain. There's stuff I got to do, prune everything that died in the frost in Texas this winter. Lots of stuff that needs to happen in the spring, but sometimes we don't think about our digital lives the same way, and we really should. This is a good time to take inventory of some of our habits and our technology. So, one place to start, let's start with passwords, like cleaning up your old, reused, probably too short passwords, maybe using a password manager if you're not already. Can you give us an overview of what a good password looks like and how a password manager works? So we hear in our line of business when we do a lot of talks with the public, we hear like a distrust of password managers. They're not too sure. So just a little smidge, as non-technical as you can about how those solutions work. I'll start with you, John.
Absolutely. So, folks, when it comes to a good password, it's got to be memorable yet complex, right? So, think about things that they're, whether it's song lyrics or things that people can't attribute to you, but you will not forget. And then mix in characters or numbers, again, that you know. If you have a large number of accounts, I know that gets very difficult. So, that's where we kind of talk about password managers, which we'll get here to a second. But for ones that you want to memorize, they need to be long, they need to be complex, right? And then you memorable. If you make all of that something in your head, right? Then you can be successful. Don't make them short, right? Don't make them your kids' names, your pet names. Don't make them anything you've shared in your online life, right? Don't make them those questions that they put on Facebook. Tell me about this about you, right? That was just a big password generating scheme back when they did that. So think about those things, and then I'll let Lance talk a little bit about password managers, and then we'll both talk here in a minute. But passwords, simple or not, sorry, complex, not simple, but memorable and long. Go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, and really, regardless of what you want for the perfect password, to build on what John said, make each one unique. So every account should have a very unique password. Now, if you're like me, that means you could have literally hundreds of personal passwords, which I do. So I've heard people in the past give advice never write your password down. 20 years ago, that might have been possible when you had two or three passwords, but now in today's digital world, you can easily have 200, 300 passwords. So to Lisa and John's point, I'm a big believer in password managers. Now, what are they and are they perfect? All a password manager is a technical way, software that enables you to securely store your passwords for you so you don't need to remember them. It creates passwords for you. It stores them for you. It logs you into websites for you. It lets you know when you have bad passwords. So they can be a tremendous friend. Now, people always have the concern, but Lance, isn't that a single point of failure? It can be, but what you can really do to up your game is simply make sure you not only have a good password for your password manager, but a second factor, something called two-factor authentication. If you have both of those, your password manager is going to be pretty rock solid.
So
Absolutely,
tell
Lance.
me,
Couldn't agree more. Sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
no, tell us a little bit about how some of that other, you touched on it a little bit, Lance. It's going to tell you if you're using a bad password. Like it might tell you if you're using a password that's already for sale on the dark web. It might tell you if you're using a password that's too short, or you're using the same password on multiple sites, and that's a bad habit as well. Um, so one of the best pieces of advice I have for people is that I can authenticate faster using facial recognition and using MFA, which we're going to talk about in a minute, with a password manager than I could if I had to type in the username and password myself. Like they are that
Yeah.
convenient, especially when you're using a biometric to open the password manager. Um, so talk to me a little bit more about how they can help you create strong passwords. I mean, they're more than just a vault. I like that we don't call them vaults anymore, that we call them password managers because you're really managing a lot of stuff. Family accounts. We have all texted a password to a partner or spouse or a kid or a parent. And then for good measure, we turn around and text them the MFA code too, because like your spouse is booking your vacation and they're using your frequent flyer miles to book everybody's tickets or something. Like there's tons of good, reasonable use cases why you share passwords with people in your family and in your circle. So how do we do that more securely? It's probably using a password manager. Anyway, talk about how easy it is to create passwords on a password manager too.
Well, John, how about you go ahead?
Absolutely. So most quality password managers out today, and I'm not going to endorse any of them or either way, but when you go to a registration site or you go to a website, they'll say, hey, do you want me to suggest a password? And do you want me to suggest a strong password? A lot of them have customization where you can actually look at the requirements of the password from the site and put that into your password manager, and it'll generate something, again, completely unmemorable to you, non-attributable to you, but very secure. So that's a good thing about those. They're also stored securely. So most of them store that information encrypted on whatever device you have. And that encryption is only openable, like what Lisa said, usually with an MFA token or authentication of some kind, whether that's a biometric or a FIDO key or a bunch of different options in that space. Additionally, the great password managers that are out there are looking at things called rainbow tables, which are these tables of all these passwords that people have used for forever and said, your password's in this table. Maybe you shouldn't use it. Spring 2025, not a great option for a password, right? But met a lot of criteria for passwords for a long time. So staying away from things like that. Also, some of them are even more powerful as they constantly look at breaches and will say, hey, we've detected a password you use in a breach. Maybe you should consider changing that password or maybe even changing your username because it was in there as well. There's a lot of functionality. And the newest one from our friends at Apple, they offer very simple sharing, right? So my wife and I share a hotel account that make reservations all the time. And she's consistently asking me for the OTP that I get when she tries to log in because that hotel is very good about detecting logins from different devices, right? And again, that's a healthy thing that they should be doing. But because of that, we're able to work very securely. She can make the reservations. We can go places on the weekends. It works out really well for us. So there's some other things out there I'll let Lance talk about too. But again, a password manager can make your life faster and simpler and more secure.
And one more thing to add. I don't know about you, but I've got some older family, like my grandparents,
Yep.
that get a little overwhelmed with password managers. John was talking about all the amazing features. Sometimes all those features can be just a bit confusing, especially for people who are not comfortable with technology. So if you have someone that goes, yeah, password managers are not for me, folks, there's nothing wrong with writing those passwords down in a notebook, as long as you store that notebook somewhere safe. In fact, in some ways, a notebook can be even more secure than a password manager because nobody can virtually break into it. So while password managers are great, there are certain people it may be a little overwhelming for. Password manager book may be the perfect solution for them.
So Lance, you're
And they
preaching to the
might,
choir. My parents have a spiral. They put non-attributable information in front of it that only they know what website it goes to, and they write their password right there. So even if it's stolen, it's very hard to detect that it goes to that site. Go ahead, Lisa.
They might not have a lot of accounts either, and so it's not quite as
Correct.
difficult for people like
Absolutely. I
us.
think I've got
Yeah.
800 different passwords right now. So
So one of the things that we survey people about in our annual O Behave report of attitudes and behaviors is about their password habits and how do you keep track of all your passwords. Password notebooks are very popular. You're right, Lance. Um, it's a continuum. Nothing is 100%. We really like password managers because we think that's better than like keeping a spreadsheet on your laptop, for example. Um, so there's things that are more secure and less secure. Password managers are close to the top, but some of those other things that I think people do, maybe keep the password protected spreadsheet on their laptop. They don't realize if they get a malware infection, the only thing between a bad guy and all your passwords is that one password that you're using on that note or on that spreadsheet. So things like keeping them a note on your phone, things like that. You might feel like you have more control, but really those are not as secure as using other methods like a password manager. If you're trying to pick one, we would recommend you consult Tom's Guide or Consumer Reports. They've got articles and reviews to help you pick one, but there are some really great features. You can store things like credit card information in there so that when you're shopping online and you're doing a form fill, it populates all that for you. You can store other identification. And then those family accounts are super, super handy when you're trying to help your aging parents with their account or help your kids with things. So we're huge fans of those solutions. So you mentioned, Lance, using multi-factor authentication to get into your password manager. So let's talk about that. Oh, one more thing. I don't want to forget about password managers. So if you're like me in my garage and I'm just dreading it and it feels like an overwhelming task, if you feel like that about password managers, like this is, I have so many accounts, I don't want to spend a whole Saturday trying to get all my accounts in there. Put your most important accounts in a password manager, like your financial services accounts, email, social media, healthcare, and then maybe if you're like John and me and your travel accounts, your hotel and airline accounts are really important, you put those in there. And then you install it on your browser and you just let it run over time. And as you're visiting sites that aren't in there, it's going to ask you, would you like me to add it? And that might also be a good time to change a password if it's too short or if it's one that's been reused. So you don't, this is not an all or nothing thing. You can do this over time. It doesn't have to be so overwhelming. Okay, so like my garage. So MFA. So this is taking security one step further, right? This is the belt and suspenders approach, and more platforms are allowing people to enable multi-factor authentication, which is great. I like it when platforms mandate it that you have to use it, but it definitely helps to protect our information. So how does it actually work, and what are some different forms that we should be looking for?
Well, real
Go ahead,
quick, I
Lance. You
first
start.
start off with the why. So passwords are really no longer enough. 20 years ago, having a good, strong password was probably enough to protect your account. But cyber attackers have upped their game, and there are so many different ways they can get your password. So passwords alone are no longer enough. So that's the why for the second factor. Bad guys have upped their game. Now we need to up their game. So then, John, I'll hand it off to you to explain the what.
yeah, so the what of MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. It used to be called two-factor, or it could be called OTP, which is one-time passwords. But basically, it's something you have a password, and then you have something else that goes with it, usually that can't be copied or stolen. Usually, that's a key, or that's a physical device, or that's some kind of generator that something creates a code that's only good once. Right, once it's used, it's never good again. So even if they were to compromise that code in your password, right, they can't do anything with it. Same with a hardware device. So there are hardware tokens out there today that say you insert those into a device along with your password, and that allows you to authenticate. So unless someone were to steal your password and that device, and usually a PIN that goes with that device, they would not be able to access your account. So there's a multitude of versions of multi-factor authentication. But I absolutely encourage you to turn it on everywhere you can. However, the options are, within the website. Some are better than others, but some is better than none, right? So doing something with MFA is always better than just a username and password. I encourage you to pursue companies that do that securely as well. So letting people know that, hey, I value who I am and I value you protecting me. I would like to see you doing that. Is a good thing to do as well. People like to hear from customers that security is important, and it helps drive out them doing the right thing too. So again, multi-factor, very important. I cannot endorse it enough. I've seen it protect more people than I can explain, but it is something that I truly believe in every day. I use it everywhere I can. And I use multi-factor on my password manager as well. Like Lisa mentioned earlier, protecting those keys, especially for the ones that don't protect themselves, is very important.
Now, go ahead, Lisa.
Just gonna say we have a lot of questions coming in, and that's great. I see Lance is trying to answer some of those. We will make sure we have plenty of time for questions. But go ahead, Lance, back to you, and we'll cover a few more topics, and then we're gonna talk about some of these great questions.
Yep, I'm answering them, but folks, we can also go discuss them when we're done here. They're not going away. Now, while MFA is great, just keep in mind, folks, once again, the problem with cybersecurity is we can take something simple and make it confusing. First of all, not every website calls MFA. Some call it 2FA, two-factor authentication. Amazon calls it OTP, one-time password. Google calls it two-step verification. Microsoft calls it passwordless authentication. So some people call it pass keys, which is a type of MFA. So keep in mind, every site's going to call something a little different. But to John's point, ultimately what you're doing is you're adding another step. And that additional step makes it much, much harder for cyber attackers to get in. They hate it. So if nothing else, use MFA or whatever the organization is calling it for your most important accounts.
Absolutely.
So, John, tell us a little bit. Of course, like any technology, the bad guys have figured out how to hack it. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't use it, like you were saying before. Some MFA is better than no MFA. But what are some of the red flags to look out for? How can scammers make a mess of?
Absolutely, right. So we all get a text or an email, right, with a code in it. We've seen that. When that says in there, don't ever share this with someone, they mean that, right? So companies say, no one will ever call and ask you for this code. If someone calls you and says, hey, you just got a code to your email, please give it to me, don't give it to me. You're being the victim or you're being attacked, right? Same with a text. Hey, can you share this information with me? Again, anyone reaching out to you, always say, or if someone calls from your credit card and says, hey, do this, look on the back of the credit card, call that number back. Hey, I'll call you right back. If they object, instantly have your kind of spidey senses go up that, hey, this is a scam. This is someone trying to steal my information to do something with it. So always be proactive, verify who you're talking to. Bunch of different ways to do it. Again, most big companies, though, have a 1-800 number, very accessible. If anyone ever calls you from that company and says, hey, I need to talk to you about this, say, great, let me call you right back. They'll be connected. You'll get the same service, but it's a way of securing who you are and verifying or authenticating who the other person on the other end of the phone is. So very important to do those things. Again, don't give out your one-time passwords over the phone. Don't reply to anyone via text asking for them. Always assume that those kinds of questions are someone trying to take advantage of this situation.
Yep, I heard of scammers a couple weeks ago. They're not just spoofing a random number from the company. They're actually spoofing the number that's on the back of your credit card. So even if you see that as an incoming call, hang up and
call
that number yourself.
Absolutely.
And then the whole layer of AI adds a next layer of complexity because no longer can you confirm somebody based on the number they're calling with. Caller ID can be spoofed, but now with AI, voices or voice cloning can be spoofed.
Yeah. So we've heard many cases lately of people calling. It sounds like my son or my grandson or my aunt or my mom. They've pulled their voice from somewhere, right, and created it. Always call them back. Hey, this sounds kind of a strange situation. Let me call you right back, right, at the number I have for you. Do a verification that way. Again, no one wants to distrust family or things like that, but protect yourself when you feel those situations. If it doesn't feel right, probably isn't.
Yeah, we actually have an AI campaign that we're going to run for with some radio advertising and outdoor advertising for April Fools because we felt like deep fakes and April Fools Day go together. But if you're a security professional or you're trying to educate your community, we've got a campaign kit that's available now. Lucas, if that's not on StaySafeOnline.org on the homepage, if you could throw a link to the campaign kit in the chat, that would be great. But it's going to lean into mostly deep fake voice calls, that real-time voice swap that can make it really, really difficult. One last point about MFA is that according to our OBehave research, the demographic that has the hardest time setting this up is our aging population. So work with your parents, your grandparents, aunts and uncles, your neighbors, anybody in that demographic. Because of all the names Lance listed, all the different names it can be called, it can live in different places in the settings. We have a page on StaySafeOnline.org that has links to all the security and privacy settings for all kinds of popular apps and websites. But even so, if I were to say to my mom, go to the settings menu and figure out how to enable MFA on Meta Account Center, for example, she might make it to the settings menu without me, but she probably won't get very far after that. So they need hands-on help, not just some education, but actually folks to help them set it up. Okay. Another thing that happens that gets gunked up over the course of the year that we need to clean every spring is just accounts that we don't use anymore. Things that we've got on our devices, it's just easy to forget. Um, so this can lead to us sharing unnecessary information with these different platforms that can also create some security risk. Lance, what should we do about these old accounts? Can you just delete the app? What do you do?
So once again, that's where a password manager can be really helpful also because you can forget you have an account. Sometimes you get a random email, hey, your account. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that. So the most secure account is the one that you don't have. So if you don't need it, if you don't use it, delete the account online and or delete the mobile app. And that's why I love password managers. Password managers, when you look at them, you can go through it and you're like, oh, I don't use that anymore. So to just Lisa's point, once a year, go through, delete those accounts you no longer need.
So one thing to
Yeah,
note
so
is that deleting the app and deleting the account are not the same thing. You guys want to talk about that a little bit?
John, you're on.
absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry, guys, my Zoom crashed. I disappeared for a second, but I am back. So a couple things on what Lance said and what Lisa said. So I've gotten to the point where I don't register for websites a lot of times anymore, especially if I'm buying things. I'll use a wallet
Yes.
product
Yes.
and versus registering and creating a user and account, right? Because then there's nothing ever there, right? If there's no account to be breached, there's nothing to be stolen. So that's one of the things I do there. Additionally, I go through my phone on the regular and I look at what I've used, what apps are there, which ones I haven't used in a while. Same with passwords in my password manager. And I go and I actually unenroll. So some companies make it difficult, some make it more simpler. You can go into your settings a lot of time and finally go into privacy and security settings and actually remove the account. So delete it completely, ask the company to remove your data, right? You can also contact them and say, hey, I want you to forget me, right? Types of things like that are very important if you think you have information stored places that you don't want it to be there and you're not using it. So it's kind of like online hygiene. You walk around, like Lisa said, you clean up your yard after a big storm. Same thing after a lot of work, walk around your online personas, clean them up, make sure there's things that aren't hanging out there that could cause problems down the road. So I do that probably once or twice a year. I went through my closet this weekend, cleaned out all my shirts that don't fit anymore. Same thing with my online life. Go through, get rid of the things that don't fit that I don't use.
Too big, right, John? Nothing ever gets too small. It's all too big,
I've
right?
I've
If we're, if
I've
we're, if
gotten
we're
lucky,
moving
and
in the
I
right direction,
I am
it's
heading in the
all
right direction
that's
occasionally.
awesome.
So trying to do the right thing.
Me too. Um, Yeah, and you might hear this referred to when you hear people talk about privacy or security legislation, mainly at the state level, or I think they call it this in GDPR as well. It's that right to be forgotten. And companies can make this easier or harder. In some cases, you actually have to call. It's usually easier to Google how to delete an account or the right to be forgotten about a particular account than it is to go into the app settings and try and find it yourself. Because if it's usually not to their advantage for you to do that. And so the user experience leaves a little to be desired if that's what you're trying to do. Okay. Um, the other thing we have a tendency to do and when we're trying to clean things up, and it's another bad habit that we have a tendency to use during the course of the year is clicking remind me later when we see those pesky updates. I noticed that a lot of updates will run now without us having to do a restart. Because my theory is that people click remind me later. And again, we have research about this in OBehave too, how often people click that because you're in the middle of something and you don't want to have to stop what you're doing and do a restart. But how do those software updates help to keep us safe? Why is that important not to click remind me later?
Lance, why don't you start and I'll go in a second.
So the whole idea here is Cyber attackers break into systems by exploiting known vulnerabilities in those systems. Well, not always known. They exploit vulnerabilities. Vendors are constantly patching those known vulnerabilities. So what you want to do is ensure your system's always updated. So when your system is asking, hey, can I update? I know it can be a little frustrating, but you want to update now, because not only are they fixing those known vulnerabilities, but they're giving you or adding new security features. Now, it drives my wife nuts. She's always 2 versions behind me, and I have to keep reminding her. But ultimately, it's a great way to help keep you and your systems secure.
So Lance, you couldn't be more right. So some things that I do in my family, whenever a kid gets a phone, the first thing I do is I go turn on automatic updates. My guys, we're going to set this for the middle of the night. You shouldn't be on your phone anyways. Same thing with computers, right? If you proactively make those settings so that you're not being prompted, check every day, reboot at 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., whenever you're not using it, it's a great way to be proactive about it. Also, don't push those things off. I talk to people all the time that don't realize they think it's a feature or a functionality update only. No, a lot of times there are security vulnerabilities, again, not widely publicized as part of the update, but are absolutely rolled in. And a lot of times those are things that are not necessarily the cause of that app builder or that app company. They utilize other companies. Those companies have vulnerabilities. So it realizes kind of this snowball effect of everyone's got to patch and update sometimes. So be proactive about it, but plan it around your life, right? As Lance said, make it happen and schedule it and do it when it's convenient for you, but stay on top of it. I cannot stress how important it is, right? That when I see bad things happen, it's either because they weren't patched, right? Or they didn't manage their online personas correctly. Almost always that's the case.
Okay, we have some fascinating questions coming in, so we're going to move to some of those. And then at the end, I want you both to be thinking about what is that one piece of advice that if you had to boil the ocean that you would give people before we close out. All right. If you keep your password manager open in your browser, what if your account is hacked? Can hackers access all your passwords if the password manager is unlocked on your browser?
You want to go, Lance? You want me to?
Go, I'll let you start, John.
So the answer to that is it depends, right? So it depends on the product you're using. It depends on the integration of the browser. I personally am not a big fan of browser-based password managers. Not saying they're not good enough, right? Better than nothing. Not a fan of those. Also not a fan of those a lot of times that are tied to an email account or other things that could be compromised. So just be wary of those. If they are separate, the rule of thumb is it's probably not a risk, but again, be careful. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, just like you wouldn't with anything else.
So, and to John's point too,
are you talking about ones that are in the browser, like what's in Google Chrome? Or are you talking about having the browser plugin installed on your from the password?
The plugin. Yeah, the plugin.
Okay. Okay. Lance, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if somebody has hacked into your computer and totally owns your computer and can install whatever malware than they want, yeah, you're at higher risk, much higher risk. But to John's point, it depends on the attacker. It depends on the malware. It depends on the password manager implementation.
I don't use my password manager in my browser. Then my chances of using it are going to greatly decline because of the
Yeah.
convenience. And if that causes me, it's a risk assessment, because if I'm afraid of one thing, but that causes me to have bad habits in another way that are actually creating more risk than that other thing I'm afraid of, then so for me, it's a trade-off. And if I feel good about not getting a massive malware infection on my device, and I'm paying attention to other things, then I'm not as worried about having that plugin on my browser. Does that make sense? Do you guys agree with that?
So yeah,
Absolutely.
To Lisa's point, I don't store my passwords in my browser. So when my browser asks, Lance, do you want to store this password? No. I store all my passwords in my dedicated password manager. But I do use the browser plugin to that password manager, to Lisa's point.
Yeah.
There you go. So again, none or something is better than nothing, right? Always use what's, something there. If it's convenient and you like to use that, it's okay, right? There's just different trade-offs for different types of environments. It also kind of depends on what endpoint you're using as well. They all can be very different.
Okay, somebody has asked another question related to password managers and MFA. Most password managers can also handle MFA. I personally find that really convenient for the one that I use. Would you recommend using a separate password manager that is different from your MFA tool? Is there any reason to separate those two processes?
Yeah, so obviously convenience and adoption versus use. So in my mind, separate is better, right? But is it needed for you? I don't know. If you're not going to use it because it's separate, then no, that's not better. If you will use it and it's together and you feel that level of comfort and you feel that you've secured that application, then you're all good to go, right? Do the best thing that's for you. But by all means, don't decline to use something, right? Simply because it's inconvenient.
And I don't store my second factor information in my password manager, just that way my password manager is not a single point of failure.
Absolutely.
Do I need to change the password regularly that I use as my login to my password manager? Like I have to regularly change other passwords. So let's just talk about password rotation overall. Like, is that even a thing anymore? Do we need to change our passwords regularly? And should we change the password to our password manager regularly?
Now, this is a healthy debate in the cyber community right now. So
It sure is.
NIST has stepped into this heavily with their latest releases talking about password expiration and moving away, right? If you have strong passwords, the current NIST recommendation is only to rotate those on a very long basis or if they're detected in a compromise. Some of the other regulatory agencies disagree with that. My personal opinion is there's nothing wrong with rotation, right? You don't necessarily have to be every 90 days or things like that, right? With the strength of passwords and the cracking of them becomes less likely the longer you get. I am a believer, though, in rotating that kind of one password that protects them all on a regular basis, just in case, but also make it complex yet memorable. So I do believe in do that. I do that myself. I change the PIN on my phone. I change some of those things on a semi-regular basis to protect all of those other things that are stored in that password manager.
So
And to
Lance answered a
John's point,
question.
yeah, to John's
Go
point,
ahead.
he says it's debated. I don't. I don't change my passwords. Neither do I believe in password rotation. If
Yeah.
your passwords are unique, strong, and especially using MFA, I've got 300 passwords.
Yeah, I don't do it either. The most important thing that I wish people did though was if they know their data has been involved in a data breach, they should absolutely change the password to that
Right.
account. I don't think when we get those free credit monitoring letters in the mail, it rarely says you should also change your password to that account.
Yeah. So let's highlight that real quick. When your password manager tells you that your data has been detected in a breach or your password is public, then you absolutely need to step in as soon as possible, go rotate that password, right? Change it out, protect yourself, and make sure you're not using it anywhere else as well.
So somebody asked a question earlier about storing your passwords that would need to be used by your estate, and there's in the answers section there's an answer you can see there from Lance. But I think password managers also have a feature that allows you to sort of delegate access to somebody if something were to happen to you. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, so the concept of a legacy contact has really come up a
Mhm.
lot lately. That started a lot in the finance business before cyber, but now with cyber, you're seeing it in social media, you're seeing it in password managers. The idea that if you're unavailable for some reason, right, someone can step in that you've pre-selected to have access to some of your environments. Again, make sure it's someone you trust. Make sure it's someone who has the right things. Make sure you've got the right controls in front of it. But there are offerings out there that in case you do have things that are personal to you, but you want your estate or you want your family to be able to access it in case you're incapacitated, it's important to have those set up.
So there's two other things I want to talk about. One of them is quantum and one of them is passwordless. And both of these are things where I will hear people use it kind of as an excuse to continue their bad password habits because it's not going to matter in a little while. So talk to us about the risk to password managers with quantum computing. We'll start with that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use one today. But what are the risks, and do you think there's a real possibility that I mean, you have a lot of companies. I think what people forget is yes, we have adversaries working on quantum, but we also have a lot of companies in the US working on being quantum proof. So I'll let you guys talk about that.
Right now, if you just follow best practices, long, unique passwords with MFA, I'm not worried about it. I mean, when quantum finally comes out and the bad guys are using it, I'll worry about it. But for now, we got bigger worries.
I
Exactly.
absolutely could not. I agree with Lance 100%, right? When the quantum is released and we see those first attack vectors, we can have a conversation about it. I think right now, again, stick with, like what he said, MFA, long, complex passwords. When quantum becomes a reality, we've been hearing about quantum being a reality, I think, for 15 years, and it's not there yet. A lot of people are claiming they're close, right? But still not there yet. It's something to talk about.
What is passwordless authentication? Let's talk about that one. I'll hear people say, well, I'm going to keep my bad password habits. I don't really care because pretty soon we're not going to, I read that we're not going to have passwords anymore. The whole world's going to be passwordless. That's also not an excuse to keep using bad habits in the meantime. So what does it mean though to even be passwordless?
So again, this is another one of those debatable topics. It's kind of interpreted by however you want to do it, but it means authenticating to an environment without using a password, whether that's through a biometric only, whether that's through a term called a pass key, right? There's a bunch of different options out there today, but it says, hey, I'm using something that is not a password. It's probably some kind of cryptographic algorithm generated device that allows me to authenticate and say I am secure, right, to this environment. Now, the problem is I've seen some issues with the implementation of some of those passwordless environments, right, where someone has been breached and their passwordless has been set up somewhere else, right, and then you go change your password and you're still impacted. So it's not foolproof by any means. So there are things out there you've got to be aware of, but still, don't get rid of your hygiene, right, just because you have something new, right? I mean, if you bought the greatest lock in the world and installed it on your house, you would not use the key that came with it from Home Depot. You'd still have someone come out and rekey it, right? So although it's a great solution, make sure you're taking care of yourself and you're doing the right thing with these new technologies and new ideas.
So somebody said, can you explain a little bit more about a password manager not being a single point of failure? I think we're talking about multi-factor authentication there. Um, but I think there's a lot going. So this brings up a topic of kind of zero trust and passwordless and what's happening behind the scenes. So Lance talked about, if Chrome is asking to save your password, maybe don't do that. I think there's if you ask my personal opinion, I would tell you that Chrome will probably get to be the first zero trust, like big public public facing application. So talk a little bit about like the analytics and the data that is being looked at to help authenticate you in a passwordless world, and that your password manager, just because somebody maybe has there's more going on behind the scenes, I think, that people realize. There's more security happening behind the scenes than people realize. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that puts some people's mind at ease. Not that they shouldn't have good habits, but in addition to their good habits, there are companies really doing some interesting things to make sure that that's really you.
So yeah, just real quick, we all know passwords are a pain. They're confusing. There's a lot of friction. Everybody hates passwords. So organizations are really, really working hard to remove that pain. And to John's point, that's why you're seeing a big push to biometrics. Why do we look at our phone? Because that automatically authenticates us. So different companies are doing that in different ways, to John's point. And if you've heard a term called pass keys, all a pass key really is multi-factor authentication that uses biometrics. So you as a user don't have to remember or do anything. You just look at your phone.
And there are other things going on behind the scenes too, as Lisa said. So a lot of companies are looking at where you last authenticated from, what browser you used, how are your typing habits, who you are, right? So there's these things where they say you were in Dallas an hour ago, and now you're trying to authenticate from London, right? That's an impossible travel time, right? So that can't happen. So we're going to maybe add some additional rigor to authenticating your session. So a lot of this is going on behind the scenes. A lot of companies are doing some really great work here. So I encourage y'all, again, if you're interested, to go look at these things that they're doing. Lisa mentioned zero trust. So how do you always say, I'm going to treat you as kind of adversarial, right? And only give you what I really think you need to do your job, or the functions you need to conduct business with us. But adding in those other things behind the scenes that you don't even know are happening helps protect us all and makes us a much more secure environment.
So somebody's asked a question here about Google's password manager or and having Gmail. So I've noticed that Gmail is forcing me to authenticate less often or to go through MFA less often, and that's because they're looking at my patterns of behavior. They're looking at how I move the mouse. They're looking at where am I physically located? They're looking at especially Google because they have insane amounts of data on all of us, good or bad. They're using that as part of the equation on is this Lisa or is this somebody else? And so in some cases, I think we have a gut reaction of like, well, why haven't they forced me to go through MFA more frequently or whatever? And in some cases, like I would say with Gmail and Chrome, it's because they're pretty sure that you are who you say you are, and they're looking at other pieces of data. Um, Walter says MFA via authenticators becomes problematic when one changes or worse, loses one's phone. I would agree with that. My answer to that, even though it does carry some security risk, I'm all about the convenience, being as secure as I can with convenience. That's one of the reasons why I've got MFA in my password manager, which is across devices, and I can log into that on the web and sort that out. But any other advice about that when you lose or change phones?
Yeah, first off, I mean, a phone change is never convenient, right? Especially a lost phone change. There's always things that are impacted. You've got to restore your profiles and things. So that talks about kind of you want to then store your passwords and those tokens in a cloud solution that's then re-downloadable or reusable.
Yeah.
That's a personal decision. Again, it's a risk assessment based on who you are and what you want to do. But there are options to work around that. Personally, I do that. So I use the cloud version, I MFA, and I protect that, and I rely on that company to protect me in that instance. So, Lance, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No, agreed. Same thing. Same idea.
So somebody said they've just researched password managers for a pre-retirement seminar, and they found that Bitwarden has a free option you can use on multiple devices. So, and Lance took some questions earlier in here about free password managers. So some of them are not great. Some of them are just fine, like Bitwarden. Generally, what happens is if you want to have a family account, or depending on the number of devices you want to have it on, that's where you start ratcheting up to a paid account. But again, I would just encourage you to do your research on the reputation of the company. Look at Tom's Guide, look at PC Mag, look at Consumer Reports, publications like that. I'm a Bitwarden user, so I'm a little bit biased, but I've used other ones as well. And there are some free options that are acceptable, but just do your research there. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about deleting accounts. So somebody says, when is it appropriate to keep or create an account to help prevent crime against you? I've done this for my parents. Example, 2 people at my company had false unemployment claims filed with their personal info. They didn't know until the paperwork caught up between the state unemployment office and our employer. That happened a lot during COVID. I was told a method to help prevent false claims is to create an account with a strong password with the unemployment office. It prevents the scammer from creating an account as you. That's absolutely true. Do you guys want to talk about that a little bit?
That's a good one.
Go ahead, Lance, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, that is one of those great ideas for an exception. So, do I use Facebook? No. Do I have a Facebook account? Yes. That way, I can't have somebody pretend to be me on Facebook. Same thing for some other social media accounts.
That's a great piece of advice, right? So protect those, lock them down, and say, hey, this is me, but I don't use it, right? I think the IRS does something similar, right? Where you can set up an account with a PIN, right, to prevent others from filing returns or false returns, right? So in those instances where someone can do something pretending to you, there's a financial motivation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with getting in front of that and owning that account before someone else creates that persona.
I think it's really important for financial services accounts, especially if you have aging loved ones who say they will never use online banking, they have no intention of it. You can either create an account for them, with their permission, sit there and do it with them, if you're one of their caregivers or have that authority. Or you can actually contact the financial services institution and say to them, we never want online access to this account. That's actually something that a lot of them will completely disable.
So great advice.
So,
And I forgot about this. I opened accounts with my kids recently, and they gave us that advice to go ahead and open the online accounts for them to prevent from someone else attempting to go after their personas.
So we've got a few comments on here about privacy and security and people not feeling like why would somebody want my information? Like, why is this important? Why does it matter?
So I had this conversation actually this morning within some colleagues of why, why do we see the attacks we see? Why do we see them framed? There's usually, and I'll say at the end of the day, usually money is the motivation, right? So through some path, they're trying to get some kind of financial gain, right? Whether that's through stealing your information and using that to do something, whether that's trying to redirect payments, right? So at the end of the day, a lot of it is money. There are other motivators out there, right? Depending on who is doing the bad actor work. But a lot of the times it's a goal of, if I get this piece of information, I then can utilize that with other things that I may already have to commit some kind of fraud and gain a financial advantage.
So somebody's
Lance,
asking,
I don't know if you've seen some other things too, but oh, sorry, Lisa.
No, go
no,
ahead,
that's
Lisa.
fine. I want to get to a few more questions,
Keep
if we
going.
can. What difference does it make if your password has already been compromised? I know that sounds odd, but why should you change it? If somebody else knows it, like why change it? Or why change it on other, maybe it's been part of a data breach at one company and you're using that same password with other companies. Like how the bad guy is going to know where else you have accounts? Why would you change that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, yeah, real quick on that one. I mean, if somebody knows the password to your account, obviously you want to change that password so they don't get into that account. But if you're using the same password for multiple accounts, cyber attackers quite often assume that. So when they get your password for one account, they simply drop that into an automated tool. Then we'll try to use your password to log into every other bank, every other social media account. So they can instantly and automatically use that if you do not have a unique password.
They don't even need to know where you have accounts. They
Exactly.
just
They're,
spray and pray across the internet.
and it's all automated.
Yep. Just like we use technology to do our jobs, they're using technology to do yours. Somebody's asked, what is quantum?
Wow. You want to go with that one, Lance? You're probably better at explaining that than I am.
Or Google might be better
Or
at
Google,
explaining.
Nope,
Google might
nope.
be
You
the
know
best
what?
example.
Fire up your favorite AI and ask you to explain it. It's just an entire thing. Yeah, an entire new way of approach to computing.
So basically, I think the question is asked though. It's very high speed, very quick contributions, right? Can do things that we take days and weeks to process today. The idea is you can process it in seconds, right? And
It's
it
computing
changes.
on steroids.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
changes the game. That's my rudimentary understanding.
Yeah. You'll learn a lot about qubits and other stuff and about physics.
I can't go there.
Yeah, I can't either. I'm an operations guy, not a techie.
So I will hear people tell me that they use really funky usernames, that they don't use their own name and they don't use their email address, things like that. Do usernames actually need to be unique like passwords?
I don't.
Yeah, I don't either. I think there
Mm-mm.
used to be a thought that the usernames need to be highly complex and unguessable. Again, it depends on the environment and the use case, but for what I do outside of work, absolutely, I do not use custom usernames. In fact, I get a little annoyed sometimes when someone says your username isn't complex enough.
So somebody said they're not a fan of biometrics, and this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine because I will see people that will have some really bad habits with their passwords and MFA and other things in general with technology, and but they won't want to use facial recognition or another biometric to authenticate, but then they're using the same password or they're not using MFA. And my argument is for me, guess what? My face is already out there anyway, especially with AI. There are tools right now that if I was sitting in the big house at Michigan Stadium 20 years ago watching a football game, they're going to be able to pick me out of that stadium of what was then probably 105,000 people. So our images are all pretty much out there anyway. So I would argue that if facial recognition makes it faster and more convenient for me to authenticate more securely, then that's my security is a bigger concern to me in this day and age than my privacy. That's just me. What do you guys think?
So I use biometrics every day in my personal life. I get it at work and at other places. I understand there's questions about privacy and mandates and things like that. I think what I try to explain to people a lot of times is the biometric that you think is being used is probably not actually how it's working. So people think it's actually a picture of your face. It's actually measurements of specific points on your face, which is rarely actually attributable to you outside of that space. So the same thing with thumbprints, things like that. It's not like we're shipping your thumbprint off and storing it somewhere, like the idea of an old thumbprint when you go to a police station. So biometrics are part of our lives. I absolutely understand people that don't want to do that. That is your personal choice. I use it every day.
Same here.
Lance, you agree with that? Yeah, me too. So a few questions here about anonymous identities. There's a couple services out there like Cloaked. Are you guys aware of these things, and what do you think?
What are they? Let me see the bring up the Q&A. Sorry.
So, disposable identities. So basically, they're making phone numbers and email addresses and things for you, so that all point back to you, but you can create them at will. So you could use those for form fills, for example, on a shopping site or something, instead of you using your actual email address.
So if I buy something from one place one time, I will a lot of times use the anonymous email that's generated by my tool, simply because I can then kind of force that into spam for the rest of my life if I want to. More of a convenience factor than a security factor for me.
Yeah, I think there's also companies out there that will help you scrub your information off the internet. I'm seeing
Absolutely.
more adoption of tools like this with senior executives and people that are highly attacked, highly targeted, especially since the CEO of United Healthcare was murdered. You're seeing more and more of these type of it's more about privacy, but privacy and security kind of go hand in hand, and that's a good example. That's the whole situation. So I see more and more people that are trying to use some of those tools, and I've seen good results. I mean, there's some people that we work with in our line of business that are pretty public figures, and I'll Google them to just learn a little bit about them, and there's nothing there. So some of these services actually work, because I have to assume they're using them because I can't find anything. Um, how can we help teens or college age students understand they should take cybersecurity important? So I'm going to start with a recommendation. Lucas, if you can put a link to Cubicle in the chat. So we developed a video series. It's a comedic series. It's like watching The Office, but it's the Office of the Bad Guys. And the episodes are just a few minutes long. And those are not bad content for older teenagers and college students, because they really do. The point we were trying to make there is that you're up against organized crime. You're not up against, the proverbial kid in mom's basement. Like, these are, like Lance said, they're using technology to do these things. It's very sophisticated. And as soon as you kind of realize that some of these little habits that you have, changing your password by one or two characters here or there, but essentially using the same one everywhere, things like that, these things that we tell ourselves, these myths we tell ourselves are helping us, it's not going to work, because you're up against very sophisticated criminals with a lot of good technology. So that's the point we're trying to kind of drive home with that series. But Lance, you're in the business of persuading people and educating people. How do you get young people to care about this stuff?
Probably two ways. One, have a young person talk to them. They're probably more likely to listen to their peers. But two, you have to talk at a different level too, because they're using technology in a different way. So it's more about, hey, you're using TikTok, Snapchat, you're gaming online. You have to speak in terms and context that they can relate to. So you're still talking about scams and passwords, but you're talking about things like the tools they're using, the gaming platforms they're using, and things like Snapchat. So you got to make
Yeah,
it relatable.
absolutely. So as the parent of three teenagers right now, I have this conversation with them, and they get annoyed when I have it in front of their friends when they come over. But I always, again, hey, just remember these basic things. Again, protect yourselves. Don't put things out there that you wouldn't want everybody to see. Right. Just realize that once you do those types of things, you can be exposed. So be careful. Right. Think about what you do, and then go from there.
So one of the tricks we used when we got a family password manager was when our kids went away to college, we just changed the Netflix password. And it didn't take very long at all for us to get the phone call or the text, Ma, what's the new Netflix password? And we said, well, that password manager thing we made you install, like, you have to go get it there. And so now we have
That's great.
two 20-somethings that are great users of password managers, but we had to
Forcing
restrict their
adoption. That's
access to
fantastic.
streaming.
That is so smart. Again, motivation, right? Finding the right
Right,
motivator.
right. Can you recommend any certain brand of security keys for MFA or 2FA, like YubiKey or any of those? Or what should people look for?
So I personally don't want to endorse any one over the other. I think there's a lot of great ones out there. Again, use what a company that's highly recommended, right? So do your research, right? look what works for you. If that's a physical key, if that's a generator on your phone, if that's something else, I can't say one is better than the other. It's all about what works for you. Biggest thing though, use someone who's respected. Go do your homework. Find one that's used by commercial companies or government, and kind of follow that path.
Okay, so in our remaining 4 minutes, if you had to boil the ocean of all the great advice, including everything you can find on StaySafeOnline.org, what would you each tell people? What one piece of advice would you offer to help people stay safe online? Lance, I'll start with you.
Cut through the noise, focus on the basics. If you just focus on 3 key things, you're going to eliminate most risk. Good passwords, automatic updating, scams. Do those 3 things, or stopping scams, and you're going to eliminate most of the risk. Focus on the basics.
Absolutely. I'm going to go back to one of our government agencies and their moniker, trust but verify, right? So don't think things aren't what they are, but go out and verify, call people back, be curious, right? Not necessarily distrustful, but understand what's happening and protect yourself. So be safe online.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending today. It was great to have such an engaged audience and so many really good questions. If we can be of any help to you at the National Cybersecurity Alliance, just visit us at StaySafeOnline.org. You can fill out a contact us form or a speaker request, anything that you're looking for. And I want to thank Lance and John for being with us today with all their great advice. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Lisa. This is great.
All right. Start your spring cleaning. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.